All right, we are live at the September 2025 Fabric User Group. We are here with Tommy Miller, who's going to be talking about Paginated reports and you. This is one of my absolute favorite topics in the entire world because what we're talking about is worlds colliding. We're talking about the brand new massive hit Power BI with all of your interactive analytics and that old school paginated report for that pixel perfect data. These two tools make up the analytic solutions that address any company's needs, and Tommy's going to be going deep into this stuff. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tommy to take it from here.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris. As always, we are going to be going through some presentation slides material, and then we'll be jumping into an actual demo, looking at some real-world examples of paginated reports, as well as some mocked up reports using AdventureWorks data. And then, of course, at the end, we can have some time for question and answer. But as Chris already mentioned, if anyone has any questions, feel free to interrupt me. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Or if you want to just post a question in chat, that works too, and Chris can help monitor that for me. So jumping right in here, hello everyone. My name is Tommy Miller. I am a architect here at Baker Tilly. I've got just over, I think, 5 years now of experience working with Power BI. And more recently, actually, I think within the last 2 years, have started working with paginated reports. So I actually started with Power BI Desktop, worked with that for a few years, and then more recently, within the last 2 years or so, have started working more in depth with paginated reporting. For those who don't know what paginated reports are, you can really just think of them as your typical SSRS reports. There are going to be some differences between legacy SSRS and what paginated reports allow you to do, but it's going to be very similar, especially with the actual output of these reports and all the things you're able to do with them. All right, so with that being said, let's jump into some of these slide materials here. Paginated reports. Well, the first question you might be asking yourself is why paginated reports? A lot of us here are familiar with Power BI Desktop, all of the great, analytical capabilities in creating those reports and dashboards. So if you got Power BI Desktop, hey, why do I even need paginated reports? Well, here are a few reasons why. One is going to be because paginated reports are optimized for printing. So you do get that pixel perfect control over, how your report is going to get printed to a variety of different export formats. These formats, are going to be primarily PDFs in Excel, but you also have the ability to export paginated reports to PowerPoint, Word, and a number of different export formats, which we'll be reviewing here soon. And then lastly, paginated reports are real time. So every time you click on that view report button in a paginated report, it is going to query the most recent data from wherever your data source is. So you no longer need to worry about setting up your semantic model, import refresh schedules to make sure, users have the most up-to-date data. You can just go ahead and query whether it's a, Fabric warehouse, a SQL Server database. The second you click that view report button, it's going to go and retrieve whatever the latest data is in that data source. And continuing on data sources, you're going to find with paginated reports, you can really connect to most all of the same data sources that you can with Power BI Desktop. So from a relational data sources perspective, we've got our big players like Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle databases, Microsoft Dataverse, and Microsoft Azure. From more of a analytical data sources perspective, you are able to connect Power BI paginated reports to your enterprise semantic models or even an Azure Analysis Services data. So really, most, I think, and I could be wrong here, but I think any data source that you can connect to with Power BI Desktop is going to be supported in some form or fashion by paginated reports. But if anyone is aware of any that are not, then that could be the case. But it's going to be a very similar experience to connecting to that data. From a data retrieval perspective, so just like when you're creating a semantic model in Power Query and you've got your different data sets of your facts and dimension tables, it's going to be very similar on the paginated report side for creating those individual data sets from writing queries. Now, I will say there is no real concept of, relationships within paginated reports models, unless if you're connecting to a semantic model. So do know if you're going out to query data from, let's say, a Fabric data warehouse, and you're bringing in, let's say, some, employee data and some sales data, right? Those two data sets are not going to be connected when you actually go to, just run a simple report. You need to make sure that you're writing your queries with the proper joins, et cetera, to make sure that everything is working together. And we'll get into some of those examples here in the demo as well. From a filtering perspective, so just like you have slicers, page level filters in Power BI Desktop, you can leverage parameters within paginated reports to filter down your data. So one example that we'll be reviewing here in the demo from a balance sheet report is you might want to have parameters for your reporting period and your subsidiary company. You can leverage these parameters directly within the queries to not only optimize performance, but limit the data that is being returned, so you're only showing the users what they want to. And then from a authentication perspective, it's going to be pretty similar to Power BI Desktop. Paginated reports support your typical authentication methods like OAuth 2, single sign-on. Typically, if you're working with like a Fabric data warehouse as an example, you're just going to be logging in with your Microsoft account, and that's going to handle all the authentication you need, as well as address security. So you only have access to things that you should have access to within a Fabric environment, as an example. All right, just a quick, and we'll be getting in the demo, we'll be going more in depth into each of these items here. But from a designing reports perspective, you're typically just going to be working with tables, matrices, lists, maybe some text boxes here and there. Again, paginated reports are really designed for pixel perfect. So think of things like more operational type reports, whether it's a an invoice form, financial reporting, where you need that exact control layout. If you have more requirements around, rich visualizations, so, working with waterfall charts or, different types of visualizations, paginated reports might not be the best solution for that. That might be more of a use case to go back to Power BI Desktop. And then within paginated reports as well, you have the ability to use sub-reports. We'll talk about some considerations there in just a moment. And of course, if you're creating a report that's going to be multiple pages, you can set up consistent headers and footers within the report design as well. So paginated reports versus Power BI Desktop. With paginated reports, again, they're highly formatted printable reports that are going to allow you to exactly control that layout and how it's being exported to a variety of different formats. So whenever you have these requirements of, hey, I need this to be formatted exactly in a A4 letter size PDF, or hey, I need this to be exported to Excel with multiple tabs, and in each tab I'm going to need some table data and a header with some summary statistics, or including filters that were applied. When you have more of those specific formats, that's going to be when you might want to look at paginated reports as an option. Now, for Power BI Desktop, as we all know, that's where you're going to get more of your dynamic interactive dashboard reporting for monitoring different KPIs and trends, really doing more data exploration within a Power BI Desktop report that allows you to leverage both the out-of-the-box and custom rich visualizations. Not so much on the paginated reporting side, all right? So you really want to make sure when you're, looking to start a new report, you want to understand, what's this report being used for? Is this more of, for monitoring trends, doing data analysis, looking at top level KPIs, or hey, is this just more of a operational, someone needs to generate, an Excel spreadsheet or PDFs that get sent off somewhere? That would then be more of a paginated report scenario. All right, some tips and tricks and gotchas when you're working with paginated reports. You're really going to want to leverage expressions and parameters within your paginated reports. And one really helpful thing actually within your kind of formatting on these is going to be using HTML markup. And that's a topic that we'll be covering in the demo today. But these different types of expressions are really going to allow you to, really get, that exact, kind of pixel perfect layout of how you want your report to export. Whenever you're working with paginated reports, of course, with Power BI Desktop as well, you want to optimize them for performance. So that's where we can leverage, those parameters in our data queries to only retrieve the data that we need. So there's no point, for example, having a data set that's going to return a million plus records for us to then just go into our table visualization on that report and then apply filter context there to only get it down to, a specific department or a specific team, whatever. Why not just move that up to your query level so you can optimize the performance? So when you click that view report button and it actually executes the query, we're only returning the data back that we need. From a sub-reports perspective, you want to use these sparingly. There are going to be some use cases where sub-reports might be required. Essentially, a sub-report is just taking a paginated report and embedding it in another paginated report. Again, while there are some scenarios where this might be beneficial, it really can slow down the performance. So one thing to consider, especially when you have reports that are going to need to print to multiple pages in a PDF or multiple tabs in an Excel spreadsheet, you might want to think early on about, hey, while I could do this with just, a number of different paginated reports that I then combine into a single one using that sub-report feature, understand that it is going to slow down the performance. It might be a better route to just combine all of those into one report and leverage page breaks in different settings within, the paginated reports tool to handle those requirements. Whenever you're developing paginated reports, you're going to want to preview them in multiple formats. We're going to be showing an example today of how drastically different the export can look when looking at a report that can export to both PDF and Excel. So up front, you really want to understand what are going to be those export requirements, because just because your report looks a certain way in PDF, it does not mean it's going to look at all the same way when you export that to Excel. So those are, requirements that you want to understand up front, because if not, it could lead to a lot of rework, redesign downstream, once those come in. Some gotchas to watch out there. So yep, those Excel export considerations. We'll be showing in the demo today how just barely clicking on a single text box within a paginated report can really mess up the export to Excel with merged columns and rows that are overlapping. So you got to be real careful when you're working with objects in paginated reports, especially when selecting them, because again, it is pixel perfect. So just moving that one object 1 pixel to the right might drastically change how it's going to be rendered, in Excel particularly. There is no auto refresh within paginated reports. So if you have a report and you click that view report button and you just leave it up, on your screen, whether you're in the, actual desktop version or whether you're looking at the paginated report in the Power BI service, you need to understand that that is not going to automatically refresh. So if you leave that screen up, all day or, for a week, I myself have a bad habit sometimes of not turning my computer off every night, and I'll have the same window open for a week or longer. You need to understand that it's not going to auto refresh. So if you had that open for a week, you're still looking at the data as it was a week ago. You're not going to get the most recent data until you re-execute that report, until you reselect that view report button. Limited visual. So we already talked about it a little bit, but within paginated reports, while there are, bar charts and different KPI visuals, they really don't look nearly as good as you get them in Power BI Desktop. So whenever you have some of these requirements where you need a combination of pixel perfect reporting along with visualizations, that might be a scenario where you could actually embed a paginated report within a Power BI Desktop report. And that's something that we'll be covering in the demo today as well. And lastly here, I've already touched on this, but those export engine differences. So just again, want to really iterate, really hammer home here. These things do not export the same way everywhere. So you got to understand what those export format requirements are going to be. The earlier you know that is going to help guide the actual development within the paginated reports tool. All right, so I think we're about to jump into the demo here, but let me quickly pause. Any questions so far before we jump into the different demo items?
So far, we're doing good. No questions. Let's get into it.
Let's do it. I'm going to temporarily stop sharing here. reshare.
While you're doing that, I'll ask the question. Do you know why the joke? Do you know why the PowerPoint crossed the road? To get to the next slide.
All right. And everyone can see Power BI paginated reports on the screen here, correct? All right, I see Chris nodding.
Yes, sir.
Great. All right. So for the first demo, we're just going to be doing a kind of quick overview of all the different options that you have here within the tool, and then we'll be jumping into a real-world example with a balance sheet report. Then we'll move into some different considerations around the sample employee list. And lastly, we'll be showing off a really cool report that I think Chrissy might have developed, but it's that sales order report with the embedded paginated report with the AdventureWorks data. We'll be showing that off. I'm not going to be able to take credit for it, but it's a really cool report, and that's what we'll be ending with. So excited to get there. All right. So starting off from our kind of just different objects, we've got tables, pretty self-explanatory. These are going to work very similar to how your standard table objects are going to work in Power BI Desktop. Matrices as well, pretty self-explanatory, essentially a fancy Excel pivot table. Lists are going to be a relevant object within Power BI Desktop. So whenever you have, let's say you have like a sales order report, and you want to have each page be a unique sales order, and then on each page you want to have a table that shows your actual sales order line items, so the actual products that were included, the price they were sold for, etc. That's where we can leverage these list objects to say, hey, I want the list to be the actual sales order header, and I want to set up my page breaks so that every single page is just going to have one sales order header record. And then within that list, we can add a table object, which is then going to return those dynamic sales order lines, because not every sales order is going to necessarily have the same number of items or products that were included in it. So from there, we can embed that table within that list visualization to say, hey, for each sales order header, I want to see what the associated child sales order line detail information was. So that's going to be when lists are going to be very helpful in your report development here. From a data visualizations perspective, again, you do have some standard, bar charts, gauges, maps, data bars, sparklines, indicators. While these are available, and while maybe there might be some use cases where you'd want to leverage these, typically, if you're seeing requirements around actually visualizing the data outside of just your standard tables, matrices, or lists, you might want to be asking the question, hey, would this be better served in a Power BI desktop report? From a report items perspective here, we've got text boxes, pretty self-explanatory. Although with these text boxes, you're able to do actually a lot more in paginated reports than you can with text boxes in Power BI Desktop. We'll be walking through how you can leverage expressions within these text boxes to actually look up data within your data sets, or even apply custom HTML formatting to get that clean export to Excel as one example. Of course, we can import images just like you can in Power BI Desktop, work with different just line and rectangle objects. This rectangle object is something that we'll be showing off today in the demo. There is quite the interesting workaround with locking object positions on paginated reports. If that doesn't make any sense right now, don't worry, we'll be covering it in the demo. And it's quite the unique workaround. It was actually, I think, the first kind of major headache I had with paginated reports when I got started, and then learning this trick really saved me a bunch of headache going forward. You've got the sub-reports features. Do note that whenever you want to embed a sub-report in a Power BI paginated report, you are going to need to have that sub-report published to the Power BI service in order to actually do the embedding. And of course, if you're publishing to the Power BI service, you are going to need a Power BI license. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but specifically for embedding paginated reports within Power BI desktop reports, I believe that's going to require a premium, either a capacity or a premium per user license. I think
that no longer is required.
No longer required. Fantastic. All right, perfect. So do want to just be mindful, though, of course, if you have those sub-report scenarios, you're going to need to actually publish those sub-reports before you can go in and embed them within your kind of master paginated report. And of course, we've got standard headers and footers. These are primarily just going to be helpful when we have reports that are going to export to multiple pages, and you want to have consistency in those headers and footers across pages, whether it be a page number, just header description, etc. All right, so that's the general kind of overview of just all the different objects we have to work with here. From a kind of view perspective here, we can see on the left, this is going to be where all of our data is going to be living. So equating this back to Power BI Desktop, that would be your kind of data pane on the right, where you're going to see all your measures, facts, and dimensions. Within paginated reports, it's going to be a combination of your data sources and your individual data sets. From a properties perspective, there are, thousands of different property options that we have within paginated reports for all of the different object types. Unfortunately, we're not going to have enough time during demo today to get into each one of these, but do know there is a lot of stuff that you can control here within properties and all these objects. So really, no matter what that requirement might be on how something needs to look when exported to PDF or Excel, through playing around with all these different options, you're most likely going to be able to find a way to do it. We do have different kind of groupings here. This is going to come more into play when we're working with different types of list, table, or matrix objects, how we want to group those records together. Have a ruler here. This is going to be actually very helpful when you're working with reports that need to go export to different page sizes in PDF, as an example. You want to make sure that, both your kind of body size, as we can see right here, by default in paginated reports, it just sets it to 6 by 2.25. And your body, which by default is going to be set to your standard letter size, 8.5 by 11. Typically, when you're working with paginated reports, it is a good practice to have your body size be the exact same as your actual report size, just so that there is that consistency when you're looking at the report in the report view, as well as in the kind of more printable view. All right, jumping over here into some different options around data sources. So as we kind of covered in the slide material earlier, there is a number of different data sources that we have available here. So everything from, if you're connecting to like a Fabric warehouse, for example, that in paginated reports is actually a Microsoft Azure SQL database. But we can go to on-prem SQL Server. We can pull in ODBC data. We can connect to Oracle. We have all these different great options. And you can actually, build these. The tool's pretty helpful for establishing your connection string, or if you know your connection string out of the gate, you can just go ahead and plug and play that in. Once you've got that data source connected, next is going to be to actually bring in your data sets. So within Power BI paginated reports, you do, and this is my favorite feature about the tool, you can write your own T-SQL here. So in that example, where you're connecting to, let's say, an on-prem SQL Server database or a Fabric warehouse, you can write your own SQL here. So while, it's typically as a best practice, we want to move things as far upstream as possible, as far downstream as necessary. You do have full flexibility here to write your own T-SQL. So, while it might be better to include that more upstream, if you're working on like a proof of concept or as an example, and you need to add some more custom business logic to your query, you do have that option with T-SQL here within the query window. Once you have that main query established, you do have control over which fields are actually going to be exposed to kind of the front end on your reporting with your different object types. So just because you're returning fields in a query doesn't necessarily mean you have to expose them to be able to kind of drag and drop into different, table or matrix objects. Just some kind of standard options here. From a filtering perspective, you can leverage kind of the tool, the data set filter options here. I will say for like basic filtering, this can be helpful. So let's say if I've got, a company parameter and I need to filter my trial balance information by a selected company, one option would be to just go in and use a filter directly on that trial balance data set to say, hey, I want, my, company to be equal to a parameter that I've specified here. We'll show an example of this in a bit. But do note that it is a bit restrictive in your options here. So if you have more kind of nuanced filtering requirements where something needs to be an and or if let's say you have I don't know, a scenario where yeah, I guess it would just be kind of more of those and or scenarios. Do note that the number of filters that you add within this pane, these are all going to be treated as and. So if you ever have more of those kind of complex filtering requirements, what you're going to want to do is actually add those parameters within your data set. So here you would just be referencing the parameter that you've already included. And then those parameters you can actually leverage directly within the queries that you write. So that's where you can leverage more of those nuanced filtering requirements. And then just kind of the last thing here being those parameters. So you're going to want to first, create your parameters within the parameters folder on the left here. And then once those get established, you can reference them within your data sets. Just quickly covering over some of the different parameter options. So you're going to have a name and a prompt. These are two different things. So the name is going to be how you reference the parameter within your data sets or your visualizations. The prompt is going to be what actually gets displayed to the user when they run the report. From a data type perspective, we've got standard data types. We can configure whether we want to allow blank, null, or multiple values. We can also specify, of course, what the values in this parameter are going to be. So if you want to hard code your own values, you can do that by selecting specify values. If you want to have your values be more dynamic, you can get them from a query as well. And would definitely, for most cases, recommend getting your parameter values from a query if possible. However, there might sometimes be examples where hard-coded parameters might suffice as well. You're able to default these parameters. So just like in a Power BI desktop report, let's say you have a slicer for a company, and the requirement is that when a user opens the report, they want it defaulted to company A as an example. You can do the same thing within paginated reports to have that be the default value selected whenever the user opens the report. And then lastly, from an advanced options perspective, you really don't need to worry too much about this. This just controls whether when a parameter value changes on the paginated report, whether the actual queries are going to refresh as well. Leaving this to automatically determine, I've never experienced any issues with this because what it will do is more or less look to see if that parameter is being leveraged within any of your queries. And if so, then it will automatically know to go ahead and refresh that query when the parameter value changes. However, if you did have more of a specific requirement, which I'll admit I haven't run into yet, you do have options here to configure whether you're going to always refresh your queries or never refresh them based on the parameter that's getting updated. All right, so that is more of the kind of just basic overview here, and you've got an images folder as well. But we've covered, data sources, data sets, parameters, all the different options here. Let's go ahead. I don't think I see any questions in the chat, so let's go ahead and jump into our first real world example here of a trial balance report. Or a balance sheet report, balance sheet trial balance, same thing. All right. So I'm going to zoom out here, and we can see I've got a pretty standard, balance sheet report that's just looking at assets. So we've got some different groupings here of current assets, fixed assets, our net fixed assets, other assets, and total assets. And if I go to run this report here, we can see I've got some different parameter options. So I've got a drop down for my company. Here I've got company A selected, and then I've got some different report periods. So I've just created a test one here for 2025 through the end of September. And we can see that when I'm looking at this report in the print layout, it looks pretty clean. It's nice and formatted, exports to your standard letter size PDF. And if I actually wanted to go and export that to PDF real quick here, I'll go to my demo assets folder. And we can see here, when I open up this PDF, come on now. And we can see when it gets exported to PDF, it's going to be in that exact same format, standard letter size, everything looking nice and clean here. Now, One thing to note, though, is that just because it exports this way to PDF does not mean it's going to export this way to Excel. And while I will say, and we'll show that there are ways to, work around this. If I just quickly go to export to Excel here and give it the same name as an Excel spreadsheet, and I open that up. And I zoom out, you're going to be like, what the heck is this? Why is my total assets all the way on the right? Why is everything so spaced, horribly here? I've got columns that are merged at the top. What is going on here? So this again is, why you want to be very cognizant of your export formats, because just because, you spent some time getting it to look a certain way in PDF, if you're not paying attention to how, those different types of updates are going to impact the export to Excel, well, now you might be back to the drawing board on redesigning your report. But just because, and if you ever do run into this, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It's just going to be a little more work. If I quickly jump over here to the same version of this report that's more formatted for Excel, you'll see that on the actual canvas here, it's going to look similar, but it's not as spaced out. But it's the exact same data, exact same fields, but just a bit of a different approach in how the different text boxes are aligned, making sure that everything is exactly touching each other, so there's less overlap in Excel. But if I go and run this report here and then export this one to Excel, oh, come on. And I will say every now and then it is going to always, when you're opening the paginated report for the first time, it is going to require you to log in. It would be nice if they added the feature that just kept you like authenticated, so you don't have to re-authenticate every time you open up a new report. Unfortunately, just is the way that it is. But now, after I run this report and I go and save this one to Excel, you can see now this is looking a lot cleaner. So we're not having any more overlapping, cells. Looks pretty much exactly the same as it would if it was exported to a PDF. And we can actually even from here, export this Excel back to PDF, and it's going to be a very similar look and feel to that original PDF document. So really just looking to hammer home here again, got to be cognizant of these export formats because, myself personally, I've run into this before where, hey, we only thought this needed to export the PDF, but now we're learning it also needs to export to Excel and Word and a PowerPoint slide. And it's like, whoa, 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 just because it's working this way, in PDF does not mean it's going to work the same way in those other export formats. All right, let me close out of these guys. And we're going to jump into our next demo here, which is going to be a very simple employee list report. Let me open that up. All right. All right. So we can see here on the screen, I've got a very basic employee list report. All this is doing is we've got some, kind of header text boxes up top here. We're showing an employee list. We're returning a count back of the actual employees that are returned. So here is where we're leveraging expressions within Power BI paginated reports. You are going to have some, standard operators, standard common functions that we can leverage. The language here, not sure off the top of my head. I might have to follow up on that here in a moment, or Chris, if maybe you can do a quick Google search. It's not DAX, so just know that right out of the gate. You're not writing DAX here. It is a kind of unique expression format. What's that?
Then I'll pull it up and chime
Oh,
in.
okay, great. Yep. But do note, it is its own kind of expression language here, but through, tools like, Copilot, really helpful for getting your syntax down. So if you have an idea of what you want your expression to do, in this case, if I knew, hey, I want to get a count of the records that are returning from my employee data set, you can go to Copilot and ask it, hey, I'm working in a Power BI paginated report. I've got a text box with an expression. How can I have it return the number of records from a data set that I have in the report? In my experience, Copilot actually does a really good job of providing that syntax for you. So definitely, if possible, leverage that. Moving along here.
I should have guessed this. I feel embarrassed that I didn't know this when I see the answer, but this is an answer from like a decade or more ago. Of course, the answer to Expression Builder, the language is VB.net.
There we go. Okay.
Old school.
Yep, I think that might have been a little before my time, but
yeah.
Very good. All right, so we can see here below just kind of the title and the count of records that are being returned. I've got the report run date. This is using a out-of-the-box expression, which we can see here under our built-in fields. So we've got an execution time that's going to return the date and time that the user actually clicked that view report button. And then I've also got the report run by user. Again, one of those other built-in fields of just returning that user ID. Do note that this isn't going to necessarily be like the user's email address or the name. It is going to actually be like the kind of ID associated with them. And we'll see, mine when I go to run this report. If you ever had a requirement, though, where, let's say you want to display the logged in user's, email address or another related attribute to that user, that's probably where you're going to want to leverage a data set that contains the user IDs as well as those related attributes. And then from there, we can leverage expressions to say, hey, based on, the user ID that's running this report, I want to use a lookup, expression to say, look up to this data set where the user ID is equal to the one that ran it and return their email address or return their department. So you're not just restricted to the user ID, but if you need those other related attributes, you're going to want to bring that in as its own data set. All right. And then from the kind of table perspective here, all we're showing is an employee ID, name, title, department, their start and end date. Let's go ahead and run the report. And this is where I'm talking about every time you open up this report, for not even just the first time, just whenever you reopen it, it is going to have you re-authenticate your account, even though I am signed in here. And there you go. Actually, never mind. I must have already had this one open. But do you know, it's very common where you're going to have to re-authenticate every time. All right. So we can see a report here, and we can see, again, very basic. I've got a department parameter. I've got a start date begin parameter. But again, just a very basic report here. But do note, even though in the design, I've got all this stuff a little, closer together, when I go to run it, things are kind of spaced pretty weird. And especially if I go to export this to Excel, and if we take a look at what that looks like here, you'll see it's really not, from a header perspective here, not exactly the best. So once this opens, we've got merged columns at the top that, if there was a requirement where someone needs to go look up values in this and feed it into a template to go do something else with that data, these merged columns and rows that are overlapping might, really cause some problems for those users. So let's take a look at how we might, clean this up using expressions in combination with HTML markup and paginated reports. So if I jump back, let me close out of this because we're going to re-export it. So if I jump back into the design window here, I'm going to go ahead and just delete all these objects because I don't want them anymore. You do have the kind of lasso tool here within paginated reports. Do note that I believe, oh, nope, you don't have to completely overlap the item. I think it works different in Power BI Desktop where you actually do need to completely surround it to select it. Not the same in paginated reports, just has to touch something of it, but we can just go ahead and delete all those objects here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a new text box. So I can go to that insert window and go to my text box here. And here I'm going to right click and say I want an expression. And within this expression, I've already got this one ready to go, but this is using HTML, which we'll see here in a second. Yep. So we can see kind of using that HTML style. I'm, configuring the font family, the color, whether it's bolded or italicized, and then just more or less concatenating everything together. It looks a little funny how this pasted in, but I believe this should still work here. But just by pasting this expression in, we can then, rather than have it all export to like different cells in Excel, we can just have the one single text box that's just going to be its own, cell when it gets exported. But what we're going to notice,
did you use an AI to write that expression, or did you
of course,
write that
Chris.
yourself?
Do you think I know HTML? Of course not. No, yeah, I did. Of course, I did use Copilot to help me with this. Essentially, the query would have been, hey, I want to have, a kind of, header that has specific font size and bolding. Then I want a line indent that's going to return a record count from a table. And then I want another line indent that's going to return, XYZ. Just by kind of prompting Copilot with those and, asking it like, hey, what is the formatting, related to HTML to do this specifically within an expression in paginated reports, it was super helpful. And I think it maybe only took me like a couple back and forths with it to get it working. So yeah, just because, if you're like me and, I would have no idea how to write all this myself, working with those AI tools can be very helpful, speeding up that development time. All right, so what we're going to see here though, and this was probably my second largest headache that I've had with paginated reports in my experience, is that when we go to run this report, and I'm just going to have this take up about the first 3 columns here, we're going to see that this is not going to do what I want it to, and I will explain after why. So once this loads, we're going to see, hey, that isn't doing all the formatting that I wanted. I mean, it's like getting some of the stuff back. Like I think it's, maybe finding the row count somewhere in here. And yep, it's getting my, start of my user ID back and, the start, and, this giving me the date of when it was run. But this isn't doing any of the formatting. What's going on here? Well, if you go to Copilot and you say, hey, why is my HTML markup not working within the expression? What Copilot's going to tell you to do is, hey, go to your properties on the text box and hit the enable HTML markup property. But here's the crazy thing. You'll see there's no setting for that. And if you even ask it like, hey, there's like a general number alignment, where am I supposed to find the setting? They'll say it's in the general setting. And then you go, no, it's not. I don't see anything here. Well, the reason you're not seeing anything here is because you've already included that expression. The way that you enable the HTML markup is a little convoluted. So you need to start with a empty text box, and then you need to drag just like a standard kind of reference into it. So here I'm just going to grab the employee key and drag and drop it into the text box. And you'll see now when I right click on the text box and go to text box properties, I've got, oh, and hold on, where did this go? 1 second. Always fun doing live demos.
You can do it. Find the property.
I can do it. No, and this is the most crazy thing. Hold on. No, this is it. Okay. Yep. And okay. So I even learned something new today too. You can do it once you already have the expression in. But okay, here's the trick. It's not text box properties. So if I just right click, or if I right click on either of these text boxes and go to text box properties, it's not that. It's actually you have to select your expression first, right click, and then go to placeholder properties. And then when you go to placeholder properties, you'll see now in my general tab, I have this new markup type option. And now I can select HTML, interpret HTML tags as styles. So that I remember spending close to probably a few hours trying to figure out where this setting was and could not figure it out. And then I think at some point I must have just accidentally clicked on, had the expression highlighted and just assumed I was going to the same place. So this can, and if you even just saw with me, I still forget sometimes, but do note here, in order to enable that, you actually have to first select either your expression or your object within the text box, then right click, then go to placeholder properties. But now that I've got that enabled down, let me double check that I did. Yep. Now when I go to run this report,
So like we're clearly seeing the difference between a low code solution and more of a pro code solution, right? Paginated reports gets much more into the pro code side of the house than the low code.
Yep. And now we can see, look at that. We've got everything formatted exactly how I wanted it to. So I've bolded and increased the font size on my employee list. I've italicized the count, and I'm returning the count back of our 10 records here. We've got a report run date. We've got a report run by user. There's where I'm referencing that ID that's associated with my account. All right, so definitely, and then the last thing here is when I go to export now, and this is why it's even better. We can replace that. Now when I go to export it, we'll see that it's a much cleaner format. So just because we're working now with the one text box, I had it take up, the width of the first 3 columns on this table. We can see it's just, merging, these 3 columns just for the text box. But when I go down and reference, individual values here, nothing's getting merged. Much cleaner, much easier to work with. All right. I see we've only got 12 minutes left here, and I've definitely got some more stuff to show. So let me kind of speed run the rest of this here. From a locking objects perspective, so more of a niche requirement, but let's say you had a requirement where we've got a table and then I want to display either like another table underneath it, or maybe like a visualization or a text box with some information. But I want the position of the text box, and I'll just add a sample one here. Let's say I want it always to show up. It's an 11 inches in height. So if I want it halfway down the report page, that's going to be around 5.5. And I can just add in that text box here and type in test. And let's say the requirement is when this gets exported to PDF, I always want it to show up exactly right here on the PDF. Well, what we're going to see is that when I go now to run this report, and I go to the print layout, we can see, hey, I put that exactly at 5.5 inches and it's 11 inches in height. Shouldn't it be more in the center here? Well, no. And the reason why it's no is because what's happening is this table is actually pushing everything below it down on the screen. So depending on the number of records that get returned in this top table here, it's going to impact where this text box shows up on the PDF. So if I actually go to my start date begin, and let's say I only want to see records that are, let's say I only want to see records that are within, after 12/1/2008. And now I go to rerun this report. Now I'm only getting back those 2 records, and see how the test used to be down here, but now it's showing up here. Again, it's just because of the different number of records that are being returned. So how do you fix this? It's called the rectangle workaround, all right? So what you're gonna do, and it sounds crazy, you're gonna add a rectangle to your report. You're then going to take, this could be either a text box, it could be a table, it could be a matrix, it could be a visualization, it could be anything. You're going to take that and then paste it within the rectangle object here, all right? And now I can take my rectangle object and just have it kind of line up with this, all right? That looks better. And now, if I always want this to show up around halfway down the screen, what you're going to do is you're going to more or less anchor this rectangle object to that top table. And the way that you do that is by dragging the top section of the rectangle up to the very top of whatever that table object is. And you'll see when it's at the top because the line color changes to blue. So effectively what I've now done is I've fixed everything within this rectangle object to that table visual. And you'll see now when I go to run this report, all right, I've got it anchored here. So it's showing up right around the, yep, that's about halfway down the screen. But now when I go and change the start date begin back to that, geez, I already forget, to the 12/1/2008 and rerun it. You'll see the test shows up in the exact same spot. So this can be, very annoying if you're, have these requirements and based on the parameters that a user is selecting is going to control the number of records that are being returned in the visual. It can be a huge headache. So just know if you're ever running into those and you need something to always show up in the same spot on your, report canvas, work with these rectangle objects, play around a little bit with it. You can use them to more or less anchor it to that top table. All right. I think the last thing that we're going to do in the demo is show off a really cool sales order report. So let me go ahead and open that guy up.
That's just awesome, Tommy. The way I always heard it was, if it's not working, have you tried putting it in a box? If it's still not working, have you tried taking out of the box? Those are the guiding words that I've heard many people say it. I don't know if the first person who said it was Patrick LeBlanc, but I know Patrick has mentioned it at a time or two. But yeah, that is your Paginated report secret guide to development. Put it in a box. Doesn't work, still doesn't work. Take it out.
Take it out of the box.
Yeah.
If it still doesn't work, try putting it back in the box.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Let's see if this guy loads up. All right, very cool. So what we can see on the screen right now is just a sample salesperson scorecard, Power BI desktop report. This is just using AdventureWorks data. So we're going to see, our reseller sales information, all of our different types of bikes and components that we're all accustomed to with AdventureWorks. So we've got a really clean looking Power BI dashboard here, but that's not the what we're trying to show for this demo. We're trying to show how you could incorporate something like this with a paginated report. So we'll see if I go ahead and click on, we've got right here a button that's going to navigate us to our salesperson order detail. This effectively is a embedded paginated report. So we can see here, it's going to take a little bit to load. But right now, once this does load, we can see we're going to be getting back that actual sales order number detail here. And do note that at the top of this paginated report, it's going to show us our report dates from 1/1/2022 through the end of 25. We can see it's for a specific salesperson, David Campbell. But let's say if I'm, back in, my Power BI desktop report, doing some analysis and I'm going, hey, I don't want to just see this data for David. I want to actually see it for Jillian here. Of course, in Power BI Desktop, we're going to see all of our visuals updated for anything that has a relationship to that salesperson. Let's say, I want to change, or maybe I won't do it for this one, but, could change the order date. But just by updating that salesperson, I can now go back over to my salesperson order detail report. And we can see that this is updated for the new person that I selected for Jillian. And how might this work? Well, it's going to be actually your settings within the embedded paginated report. So again, whenever you want to embed a paginated report, whether it's in another paginated report or in Power BI Desktop, you got to have this published to the service. But once you do, we can go ahead and embed that. And from the actual, embedded object type in Power BI Desktop, you'll see in our field well, we've got different parameter options. So here for this paginated report, it's going to require 3 parameters: the selected salesperson, the min and max dates that are going to apply these report dates here. And we're able to take the current filter context of our Power BI report. So our selected salesperson just being a simple measure connected to the live version right now, but essentially just returning whatever the value of that salesperson is. as well as, our min and maximum values of our date dimension based on the filter context that's been applied, we're able to dynamically pass those values into the embedded paginated report so that everything stays in sync between your Power BI desktop visualizations as well as your embedded paginated report. So really powerful. Again, just going back to when we were talking about, the differences in the visualization types. If you do have, a need for both pixel perfect reporting and exporting the various formats, as well as more, exploratory data analysis, monitoring KPIs and trends, that might be a great opportunity to leverage a combination of a Power BI desktop report and that embedded paginated report, and you're able to work with the parameters to make sure that everything is staying in sync between the two. All right, so I know we just have a couple minutes left here. Let me go ahead and go back to the slide material. Any questions on what we've been covering so far?
None that or there've been a couple, but I've answered them inside the chat. You've done an excellent job here, Tommy. Want to give you a big round of applause. We will be you really crushed it. To the multiple people who are asking, yes, this is already or will be on YouTube next week. For those of you watching on YouTube, hey, leave a comment, like, and share below. Yes, everyone wants more square tricks from Tommy. That's fantastic. So, thank you very much. Yes, we are still hiring. I think that might be gone. So, we might want to pull that from the slide deck, Tommy. Sorry.
Okay.
And next week, the one and only Scott Jolson is going to be doing Power BI design with Figma. I'm sorry, not next week, next month in the Madison Fabric User Group. So make sure you stay tuned for that. We can't wait to hear from Scott. And I do want to also put out a call for speakers. If you are interested in presenting at the Madison Fabric User Group, you let us know. Just send an email to Tommy or myself. We'd be happy to get you added into the speaker place. Doesn't have to be a full presentation like what Tommy showed you. So like whatever you want to talk about, we're happy to add you in for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever the case may be. All right. With that, I'm going to thank Tommy and everyone for joining us and being part of this group. You guys are the absolute best. You have the best day ever. Peace.
Thanks, everyone.